In this video, you will see how some basic CSS styles can turn a boring resume into a professional-looking document. Here you can see a resume for Jane Doe. It's pretty boring. It's got just sample text and HTML. There's a little bit of bolding, but mostly it's just text and pretty boring. It also takes up a lot of space that could be better used with some CSS styles. So let's switch to the HTML and see what we can do to fix this resume. As you can see from the HTML, it's just a basic HTML web page. There's a few HTML5 sectioning elements, like a header and a section, but there's no styles to it. So let's first add some CSS styles by adding a style property to the top. And then we're going to style the body text tag first. I'm going to give the body tag some font styles, specifically Verdana for the font family and 12 pixels for the font size. Then we'll save this document and switch to the web browser and reload. And as you can see, just doing that cleaned it up a lot. It gave the whole thing a much cleaner appearance with the Verdana font family, and it's taking up a little less space, so it's easier to read. But that's not all we need to do. Let's do a little bit more to the CSS to see how we can make it look better. As you can see from the HTML, the header contains Jane's name and her mailing address. So let's center that in the middle of the page so that it looks a little better. And then let's adjust the H1 so that it's not quite so big, bold, and ugly. So first we'll change the font family to Georgia with a serif font as its generic. And we'll make the size 28 pixels and we'll make it text align equals center, just so that we make sure that the H1 is in the center of the document. So let's save this HTML. And then when we switch to the web browser, as you can see, it looks a little bit cleaner here. You might want to do something to reduce the space between Jane Doe and her address, or you might not. But there's still some problems with the page. For example, summary qualifications and professional experience both appear to be headlines, and education and references as well, but they don't stand out on the page as much as the operations manager and the project manager job titles. So let's go in and fix that. As you can see down in the HTML, several of these paragraphs have a class already assigned to them. So let's adjust the category label class first, because that seems pretty important to me. So we'll say P category label, and we're going to change the font size, the font weight, and transform it to all uppercase. Now if we save this and reload in the browser, that makes those headlines stand out a little bit more. But like I said, we can still clean up that contact information. So let's go into the HTML because we saw there was a class on that one as well of contact info. And let's add some styles to that. Contact info. We'll adjust the font size to 14px, but in order to get it a little tighter against the H1, we're going to have to go back to that H1 and change the margin bottom to something a little smaller. Let's try 10px. And we'll say save, and then we'll reload in the browser. And as you can see, the contact information got a little larger, but it's still pretty far away from the Jane Doe. So we're going to want to change the margin. Now when I inspect this element, I can see that the margin is set on that paragraph, and we want to change that margin on that paragraph to be a little bit smaller than 14 pixels. So let's go in and do that. So to change the margin of the top, you'd use the margin top, and we're going to give it a value of, say, 7 pixels, so it's a little bit tighter. Now this should not change any other paragraph, the margin on any other paragraph on the page, because we're only affecting those with the contact info class. So let's save this document, return to the web page, and reload. And nothing happens. And that's because if you inspect the headline, you can see that the headline has a margin on the bottom as well. So we need to go in and change the H1 margin bottom so that it's not affecting it. So we go back up to the headline and we'll say margin bottom of 0, so that the only margin should be affecting it is this margin top in the contact info. So we'll save this document and switch back to the browser, and hopefully this time it'll tighten up. And when we reload, as you can see, it did. The last thing we're going to do is add a few indents to some of the sections that might make it easier to read, such as the operations manager and project manager positions. So let's switch back to the HTML. If we scroll down, you can see that inside of this second section under professional experience, there is a div with a class of indented. And let's give that class an actual indent. So we'll again say div.indented to affect only divs with the class indented, and we'll give it a margin left of 25 pixels, so that will give it some indenting. We'll save this document and return to the web browser and reload, and that pushes those over just a little bit so that they fit better under professional experience. And now, if you compare this resume to the original resume, as shown right here, you can see that the new resume looks much better than the original. And that's how you use CSS to make a boring resume look much more professional and good looking.